Hola, ojú agbára gada, ayélujára, ọ̀nà ti la àárín odò rèé kọjá, ẹ̀rù òbodò, odò ti ṣàn 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 ṣàn, ẹ̀kún omi ṣàn títí ó já sí àárín ọ̀nà. Odò lóhùn lẹ̀gbọ́n, ọ̀nà lóhùn lẹ̀gbọ́n, a ti rìn rìn rìn, a kò rí ẹni sọ fún wa bóyá odò lẹ̀gbọ́n tàbí ọ̀nà ní o. Odò láyé ẹ̀rù òbodò, ọjọ́ ti pẹ́ tí Olódùmarè ọba adẹ́dà tó dá òkè tó dá ọ̀nà tó dá odò sílé ayé, odò láyé omi lènìyàn, ẹ jẹ́ ká ṣe rere o, ẹ̀rù òbodò.
So we start the recording. So what I want to do is first welcome Dr. Icihile to BB2 Mikasa. We have a lot of the family members here from a BB2 Mikasa, which is great. We have some visitors, actually, a couple of my friends that I know from Facebook and other social media platforms. And Dr. Icihile, we welcome you. And so today's topic, I see Dr. Campbell. Today's topic is actually it's a very important topic, and we're talking today about the primacy of African mothers and women in our African liberation struggles and resistance movements. And so Dr. Icihile, what I'll do is allow you to speak a little bit about your background, what you're kind of doing now. We'll start off, we'll have Dr. Campbell, and I see he joined us, hopefully he's ready. We will do a libation statement to open up the meeting, and then we'll jump right into it. So Dr. Icihile, if you want to just speak a little bit about your background, introduce yourself to the team.
Okay, I'm waiting for the libation to happen.
Right.
No, right. Right. Good day, everyone. Hello. Greetings and peace. I'm very happy. Just to let you know a little bit about myself, my name is Iyelli, and that means she carries herself well. And I have spent my entire life trying to live up to that name and carry it. My father is from a small group of people called Bechebe. Bechebe people are found in Nigeria and Cameroon in the mountains. And the British drew the line right through the middle of us. And my dad was born on the Nigerian side. He is the only out here America, and my mom is from the south side of Chicago. And having this says everything about who I am and how I approach scholarship and work in my community. My focus as a researcher has been on looking at the role that Africans have played in the liberation of our people from the earliest moments of contact with Europeans, certainly through chattel enslavement and through the colonial period, and certainly now in the neo-colonial era that defines much of African life on the planet. Just trying to find ways to get to the heart of our own ethos and the ways in which our spirituality is a part of our freedom movement. I have a beautiful child who is currently hanging out with her father, and she teaches me as much as I teach her, probably more. And I currently work at the museum, the Reginald F. Lewis Museum of African American Maryland History in Baltimore, and I also teach at the University of Maryland campus in the Department of Africana Studies. I'm currently teaching a class called In Africa and the Diaspora, which I'm really enjoying because my classroom is quite African. I have from the Gambia in there, from Trinidad and Jamaica and Ethiopia, and we have really wonderful conversations. So this is kind of an extension of something I do every day. So I'm glad to be with you.
Sure, I appreciate it. Let's see if I can get Dr. Campbell on. Yeah, Dr. Campbell, are you with us?
Yeah.
I see Dr. Cambone's with us. I did want to definitely get the libation statement in. I see he's on the call, but maybe he's not able to connect. So in any event, so thank you, Dr. Icihile. Really appreciate the introduction. So what I want to do is I'm going to put everybody into what we call lecture mode. I'm going to unmute you, Dr. Icihile, and then we're going to have to start the conversation. I'll start off with a leading question, and we'll get right into it. And I apologize for the choppiness. I think it's a little bit choppy, but we'll make it through. So I'll put everybody in lecture mode. Okay, Dr. Icihile, are you with me?
Yes.
Okay, so to start off, the first time I actually personally saw you interview, which was a powerful interview, was an interview you did with Dr. Jared Ball on imixwhatilike.org, and shout out to Dr. Jared Ball and his partner, Dr. Haight, over there at I Mix What I Like. So shout out to those brothers over there doing a wonderful job and bringing this information to us. So, and in that interview, you talked a little bit about this topic as it pertains to the primacy of African women and liberation struggles, and you mentioned some of the difficulties you face in trying to do this research and finding those women in our stories, in our narratives. Could you speak a little bit about some of the difficulties you've had and just some of the work you've tried to do in finding those stories?
Sure. So I know in lieu of a libation, I just want to set a couple of intentions. My intention always is to speak words that are strong medicine, to reflect the highest and most important aspects of who our ancestors were and are, and that anything I say is merely a confirmation of that which we already know as African people, as returned ancestors. So that said, the challenge has been trying to find the stories that white men did not write down. To find women's stories in a sea of documents written by European, misogynist, hating patriarchs is very difficult, first and foremost. But then to find the stories of African people is always difficult, especially because at this point in our the slavery era, and our stories of resistance were not written down in that type of scale, and certainly not the driving force, motivation, the strategy, the cultural orientation that guided these practices, these movements, was not written down. So it creates just many blind spots, many invisible kind of places, stories that I kind of, many scholars have used our own cultural context and sometimes use spirit to try to help fill in those gaps. Much of what I say and much of what I try to write down is not in an archive somewhere. It is something that simply makes sense to me according to the cultural logic of my people that I've come to know and understand, and to some degree that the ancestors themselves have shown me. And then on the other end of that process, at the far end, is establishing yourself in a discipline like history, in which only certain types of knowledge are valid, and saying, okay, well, Harriet Tubman drove to work with me one day. She wrote in a coffee thing, told me I should look at this way or that way. I mean, that's not, a valid way of knowing in this system, and so it makes it difficult to even present what you come to know about it, and have it respected by not only the Western Academy, but also our own people, who are not in that place to certain degrees. So a lot of the movies. There's been a lot of movies out lately. I saw another lecture you did, a discussion you did as well, about movies and how Hollywood is has definitely played a role in either not showing or, like you said, showing a different side, which is really not valid for us in terms of our narrative, in terms of women.
I saw you spoke a little bit about The Birth of a Nation. We had the 12 Years a Slave. We had all these narratives and movies. And you spoke a little bit about how even in those stories, which we know Hollywood, we don't really expect Hollywood, because as historians, we don't really expect Hollywood to tell our story, right? So that's the first thing. But the stories that are told in these kind of presentations are one that are really misleading, on top of the difficulties of not being able to find our stories. So could you elaborate a little bit on that, and how these stories, especially in Hollywood, are really detrimental to our efforts in trying to find our stories?
Right. So when I was on that panel talking with some of my colleagues about Birth of a Nation, I think one of the major points I was trying to convey is the idea that Europeans love Black pathology. They love to see Black trauma and violence, and self-inflicted violence more so than anything else. Us hurting and in pain and stories, and that will sell, and that will be successful. That is the formula to make any movie work in Hollywood, the world. And so to try to present films that are glorious for or have representation of kind of our interior lives and relationships, our dynamics between, our dynamics in between with each other, where there is dignity and there is sensitivity and there is intelligence and there is honor. That's extremely rare, and it's a minefield. I mean, from knowing people who make films, personally, that's just a constant struggle, because it's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to exist. And so the primary reason why I would even like a film like Get Out is there is an effort made to present a character who has flaws and who has a bunch of internalized white supremacy, but at the end of the day has a modicum of intellect. He's got some sensibilities, at least that seed of potential to advocate for himself as an African person, to liberate himself. I think there's a desire among white folks to convince themselves that African people don't want freedom. We don't want to be out. We want to live in a certain place, and that we're happy, in our condition. That narrative goes way back to slavery. They're trying to convince themselves that the fight can be fought in our minds. And so, yeah.
So, yeah, that's I see those discussions going on, and oftentimes we have discussions amongst your friends and family members just to get a perspective of just how, and people who are really not what you call quote unquote conscious, so to speak, but you just got to get a sense of how impactful these narratives really are. In lieu of and additional on top of the fact that we don't get this history growing up in school, so a lot of times this is where we get our quote unquote stories. So speak a little bit about some of your research. I mean, some of your research you've done on some of the, I don't know if you want to give them specifics about certain women or certain mothers or just certain eras of women in liberation struggles. Could you speak about those eras of some of your research?
Sure. So lately what's been really interesting to me is the concept, and y'all know they spoke about this a bit yesterday, Sankofa, but modernity. So scholars like Diane Icihile and Iyelli, they've been writing about this of modernity instead of modernity with N, it's a modernity with an H. And mother and the primacy of mother as a concept in African life and survival. Their thrust is like how African people continue on the planet. How do we build communities? I'm interested in taking that a step further, talking about the idea and the concept of mother in fighting, and it's been a neat way to kind of encapsulate what I've been researching all along. And so my dissertation research is mostly focused on the Akan example of women who are taken from this in Africa into the American places, from New York, Antigua to Jamaica to even Colombia, South America, and how their background in society informs how they fight in American society against enslavement. And what I found is that at that time, you have three major patterns that emerge. You have women who serve as kind of ohema, the queen mothers, and women, you can find them in the archives, kind of written about by these white guys as kind of important, but of course the documenters, they don't really understand why these women are important. They just think they're very clothes, and you know the other enslaved have a really interesting level of respect for these women, but these women are really doing damage. And so I was interested in that tradition, trying to connect it to the vocabulary and conceptual worldview of the people, put them back into that, you know, what they did and why it was important to these liberation in these places in the Americas. And the second pattern is in maroon societies. So women's rituals and the different ways in which women sustain those communities through agriculture, defense, through spiritual and civic kind of stewardship. Those are really important aspects of a maroon community and sustain a maroon community long term. Without those women doing those things, these maroon communities are not sustainable after one generation. And then the third pattern is look at women as just as ritual experts who help us not only survive, but use their ritual expertise, their metaphysical knowledge to fight slavery, to fight slave revolts, to fight on every level, whether that's working in the house. There's a whole section of my research about poisoning certain types of herbs. And then the easiest way for me to locate and kind of contextualize what these women are doing is by reading about who was being executed, what laws were passed against what types of cultural practices. So there are these places where the Europeans would outlaw a list of herbs, like a whole list. If you're African and you got these herbs, you gotta die. You gotta, you know, you're locked up. You're punished. And then many of the punishments were also gentle because they knew that women would take the certain ways. And you know, after a while, after several years of witness of being attacked by these women, it would respond through legal means, through judicial forms of terror and brutality that was also culturally based. And so right now at the museum, I'm working on a paper to kind of look at the ways in which the American carceral system is a direct response to African culture. The way in which African people today are tortured and psychologically deprived and punished in prison, and the racialized nature of imprisonment in this country, racialized policing in this country before we even get into these correctional facilities, all based directly on the ways in which African and women families would fight against the state, the militia, the slaveholders, and those who would kind of protect those institutions in an informal capacity.
Do you see it's interesting? Do you see a commonality in the Caribbean, so to speak, as opposed to the way women did these things in, say, the Americas, as opposed to in the Caribbean, in terms of the reaction? And really, it's the fear of the Europeans of these practices by these women. Do you see a difference in those patterns, or is it kind of similar, even in the U.S. as opposed to in the Caribbean?
I think that's really a part of my work, specifically looking at how similar traditions are. If we can start to have a conversation about how Abigail and Thomas worked together as a queen mother and a chief in the revolt in 1712 in New York, and then look at Oba and Chachi, and we look in Antigua, we're looking at Cuba in Jamaica, and they're all doing the same thing. Looking at this sister over here in Virginia, Nat Turner's wife Cherry, and what she was doing, and the ways in which she was helping him with this revolt. Or we're looking at Harriet Tubman, who was known to be an Ashanti. I mean, that was just a part of how they understood her and why she had those spiritual gifts. Like, if we connect all these people, all these places, we're actually really we're seeing that our tradition is the same everywhere, and so we don't have to kind of put ourselves in these nation-state boxes that that Europeans have put us in. We can have a Pan-African conversation. We can have a unifying conversation around the unity of our African culture that allows us to move in a direction and kind of drop the flags, you know what I mean? So, and maybe pick up some new ones. I mean, even studying the Asafo tradition, the warrior tradition, looking at the flags that they carry, these sometimes, you know, they look, one of the major icons on these flags of war from Akan people is women who have given birth, women with full breasts, or, you know, with rifles and a certain type of hairstyle that, you know, in order to have war and establish your nationhood, you must have this queen mother, you must have this woman there, otherwise this is not a valid institution for your people. And then looking over here, I could read, you know, John Thistlewood in Jamaica, the slaveholder's diary, and he's writing about these African women who started doing their hair in these different hairstyles, and that was making them a little happy because this hairstyle signifies war. You know what I mean? This, you know, so these are real on both sides of the Atlantic.
It's funny. I just saw something recently about hairstyles and how they would use the cornrow patterns to kind of map out routes. Like they would map actually routes in their hair, corn style rolls. And then I also saw recently another tidbit about the hair wrapping, how they would make the women wrap their hair up. Even it's a difference in Louisiana as opposed to doing it on the East Coast. So just those simple things, like you said about the diets and the food and the herbs and things like that, is very, very interesting. So that leads me to the next question, and then I'll open it up a little bit for questions from the audience here, from our guests, about spirituality, because I know a lot of your work is centered around African spirituality and how that spirituality has carried us throughout what Dr. Marimba Ani calls it, the Maafa. And I'm really interested in, because of this way we kind of have the men in the front, and oftentimes we don't see the women, how that imbalance in our knowledge of our understanding is really contrary to what we understand African spirituality to be, right? That complementary between the feminine and the masculine energy, how we've kind of moved away from that, and how we can kind of leverage that understanding of our spirituality to kind of go back and understand our story. So could you talk a little bit about the African spirituality? And you know, a lot of times we hear about Haiti, which is you know, probably the one thing we can look at, the first African sovereign nation on this side of it, but we don't know about the women behind the scenes. And I know I believe her name is Bello, Dr. Bello, down in Haiti. Bello, she talks a lot about that. She's really, you know, upfront about the women's role. I believe it's Felicity. I believe the woman's name is Felicity in Haiti. But could you speak a little bit about the spirituality portion of this?
I mean, I much respect to Nana Bello. Naina Bello is just the bomb. She's I mean, one day I will be like her when I grow up, you know.
No, she's like what we used to say about, she makes it plain. Makes it very plain.
Makes it very plain. And, you know, try. But I think it's really important to look at the Haitian example, because there is an unapologetic, like, spirituality is unapologetically at the center of this. Vodou is at the center of this revolution, and there is the understanding, like, this is how we won. And, you know, there are women like Cecile Fatima, who is there. She's a Mambo. She's there with all of the other priests who are having not just one primary Vodou ceremony at Bois-Clement. They're having ceremonies all over the island. There's at least 13, 14 different locations where, you know, everyone's calling the deities that they need, the ancestors that they need. They're invoking Makandao, who had his own poisoning school, you know, several decades before the revolution started. He was teaching people how to poison, you know, the goal was to poison the French water supply. And so they invoked his spirit to come and assist them. And if, you know, and then there are records, and the French are really careful about writing about these records because they were just fascinated by certain things. And so French records are more interesting to me to read because there's less work I have to do to kind of figure out. I mean, they would write about, you know, these crews of like 16-year-old African girls who like walking across the battlefield with bullets whizzing past their head, chanting, you know, and calling spirit and saying, hey, bring on death. Like, they just fearless. And so, you know, there is this mistaken notion that there are men in the front and women somewhere out in the ether just kind of like cooking meals and waiting for people to come home. But that really, even being behind is, I think it is something figurative that unfortunately African people have begun to look at literally because of all the other sexist, gendered baggage that we've acquired from Europeans. But women being behind doesn't have anything to do with a subordinate position. It's like my mother Oshun teaches me. I mean, Oshun has a mirror, and people think she has a mirror because she's vain. Oshun is always checking behind her to see what's coming up. Like, Oshun's a warrior. She's got a dagger behind her back. And that is important for women to be there because they're in a position of information. We have Europeans who are spying on us when we get together for these rituals, and they see these women who are being, you know, who are manifesting spirit, these priests who are, you know, mounted by spirit and then deliver the messages of who does what when, you know. That's real important work of like when you need to do things and remember who you are, like the mirror idea. That is the point of women. That is the point of mothering and motherhood, is not just the basic level strategy of the rituals of the warfare. That is important, and women participated in that in many fabulous and just brilliant ways. But it is also those kind of in those intimate spaces for women to remind the people that you have a mother. You know, in African societies, if you're a motherless child, you're wild. But we didn't always have the luxury of having the biological mothers, our natal mothers with us, but we had mothering. There were women who stood in those positions and said, I care for you. Your life has value. You are a human spirit with worth who deserves freedom, and pushing us and motivating us to keep moving in that direction. And so when we move ourselves away from that kind of spiritual understanding, we can read these records and not know what we're looking at. We can read these records and not understand why our people made certain choices. And that, I mean, even our understanding of time, I mentioned this yesterday, without being properly oriented spiritually, we don't understand that slavery and getting free was not even just about the immediate violence and brutality and deprivation of slavery. It was about, you know, because that is sasa. That is like the present time, the recent past, the present, and the short future. But you know, women and kind of motherhood and the womb being this space of constant transformation, that reminds us that there's also a long-range future. There is the ancient future. There is the ancestors whose names we don't remember anymore, and there's the seventh generation out there in the future that we must live for today. I mean, the future we must prepare for ourselves to return to, and we have to fight for that as well. And so, you know, we lose our concept of time. We lose the sense of importance that we have to give this history. I mean, for instance, Cuba in Jamaica, I can, you know, read about her from Edward Long's perspective and see some weird black woman dressed in a crazy get-up, some costume with a wooden knife, parading around and calling herself the queen, and you know, making a complete mockery of her, and then write it down as a lazy historian or as a misoriented historian and say, oh, African women made themselves feel better by wearing colorful clothes and prancing around every once in a while. Or I can say, okay, this looks like an Akan ritual, and they're trying to install this woman. They are installing the queen mother because they're about to take that whole island back. This is the sign and the symbol of this process. And this, you know, if I don't use my context and I don't use my worldview to understand that, then I have robbed her of her proper importance, her place in history. I've missed everything. And that's really why I think that I begin with spirituality, because that really is the first frontier of colonization and destruction of African people. That is the first, and so that's got to be the first thing we reclaim if we want to get free, because if we don't have that, we have so many blind spots. We are directionless. We are motherless children. We just continue to be that.
Yeah. I'm thinking the point you made about even saying women behind is still a Eurocentric approach to even saying that. Just because they weren't in the forefront doesn't necessarily put them in the place of, subordination. When we know, even though they were doing not in our right in our face because of history, way history wrote, but we know that women were doing things, the poisoning, refusing to have babies sometimes, even to that extent that women were doing things, even nurturing their young men. We saw in the beginning of the Birth of a Nation, bringing them to the traditionalists to get that reading and things like that. And it reminds me of the movie Sankofa, which is probably one of my favorite movies. Of that woman in that picture, how she's portrayed. We see the contrasting parts of the women in that movie. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to open it up for questions now. See if some people have questions, and what happened. So if anyone has any questions right now, what they can do, Dr. Icihile, is they can ask the question, and I'll see it come up in the thing. Or because we have what I'm going to do, I'm just going to open it up to all. And see if anybody has questions.
Sure.
So if anyone has a question, they can go ahead and ask now. I'm going to unmute everyone. Feel free to jump in, anybody, if you have a question for Dr. Icihile.
Well, first of all, I'm so happy and thankful that you were here. I thoroughly have enjoyed everything so far. I could probably listen to you for hours, just going on and talking. So I really thoroughly appreciate you being here. You were talking about the French history and how it was easier or more clear to read because I guess they were just pretty straightforward. And with that, I was wondering, because I've read some of the history of, you said French were fascinated by it, and everybody is, but I was wondering if in your research you found any records of their experimentation and their experimentation and torture processes on us. I know in reading some of the history and visiting some of the places of really torturous events in the Louisiana area, in New Orleans. I was wondering if you had found in your research where they had documented anything, like they were trying to find out more about us, like find out our secrets, find out our strengths.
Yeah. Yeah, the French are interesting. That's an excellent question, and thank you. People always say in the world the French are lovers, and I was like, okay, well, they're passionate. You got to give them that, because that passionate creativity and that energy made them expert torturers. I mean, a lot of that energy was channeled into some of the most barbaric acts on the planet. And the reason why their records are so fascinating is because they wrote all of those things down in detail. They were very sensual about it, all of this different, it was a multi-sensory experience. Everything. And they paid a lot of attention to the spirituality and the things that they saw us doing. And torture is no different. I actually, at one point, thought I wanted to write a dissertation about torture, but my spirit couldn't take it. Because, even just to go into the archive, sometimes I got to put on, extra juju just to, not traumatize myself all over again. It is like that. But I wanted to show you some pictures, if I can pull them up. There's a very interesting resource, slaveryimages.org. The University of Virginia compiled a bunch of sketches, paintings, hand sketches, images that are, mostly created by Europeans, but they're renderings, they're drawings of slavery. And the French would create these interesting little diagrams of, what they would do. They would share torture practices with each other. I'm trying to give you an example of one of their more classical body-breaking methods, but it's from Martinique, and it really speaks to the brutality. Let me see if I can turn around my camera.
Okay, there you go.
This is on my computer screen, and it's in French, but the top is a brother who is being hung from a tree, but not by a rope. It's by some sort of metal contraption. And then at the bottom, this is a brother who has run away, and he was caught. And so what they've done is they have put a shackle around his neck and chain his ankle to his neck. So his leg is bent, his leg is hyperextended. And after enough time walking around like that, making sure that his leg must stay bent, otherwise he chokes himself to death, then the muscles in the lower part of his leg atrophy, and then they can just chop that off, and then he is now unable to run. So it's not the Kunta Kinte, let's just chop his foot off. It is an extended method of torture. And I find that the French paid attention to those kinds of details and just devised very interesting ways to psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally torture African people. I mean, preventing us from, burying our ancestors, our dead, properly, so that there is a total death that occurs, including a spiritual death, to deprive us of even, what they understood to be, the afterlife. And so this is, I think, also a motivating factor for the Africans in Saint-Domingue to get free. And many of whom were young people. Like we haven't even fully experienced our rights of manhood and womanhood, but we got to get out of this. We know this is wrong and crazy.
Right.
So yeah.
Did any of the research explain? I mean, we can just accept they're sadistic people, but explain why. I mean, were they, digging? Digging for something, trying to find our secrets. Some of the most torturous stuff I've heard of, or that I've seen written down, was some of the things that happened at the LaLaurie mansion.
Yeah.
And that trying to get away from that after reading that and having that in your in your psyche is just so tough. But I mean, it's just you can't even understand it. There's no way around it.
You have an African mind. You shouldn't try to understand.
Right.
Right. You can't even put it.
Right. No, don't waste your time trying down the why question, because it will only serve to confuse you, because this is not your orientation. It's not natural to think this way. This is not natural human ways of thinking and operating.
Absolutely.
But this is in essence, and this is some historians' theories, the understanding that Europe empties out its prisons, the dregs of its society, and uses those people to do the dirty work of slavery. And so we are being handled and moved around and etc. So, yeah.
I wish those stories were told.
Right. I do too. I'm working on it, but yeah, I mean, this, the worst of European society is involved in this process, and this is who we're dealing with. This is who is handling us, and that makes it all the worse. And I mean, and then during the revolution, many of the enslavers escaped to places like Louisiana and try to get out with their African people before the revolution is won. And so there's a new infusion of that, and then when Europeans are afraid, the violence always spikes up. That's just who they are. That's just the process. And so there's a ramping up of violence throughout the Americas in response to what's happening in Haiti. So the creativity then goes with that.
That's a great question. Thank you. Thanks for that question. It's definitely as you said, when you do the researching, it definitely takes a strong, because the stories are just so horrific, and like you said, because we have African minds, we can't, you can't really get to a place of understanding why they do what they do. But to understand what our ancestors went through is something that's very, 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 very challenging. Any other questions?
Yeah, I got one.
Okay. Okay.
You heard me?
Mm-hmm.
Someone has a question?
I had a question.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can hear you.
Oh, okay, my bad. First of all, I want to say this is a great discussion, excellent discussion. I also heard the interview with Dr. Icihile. Hopefully I'm saying it right.
Like,
I I heard the discussion with you and Dr. Jared Ball. It was great. What I wanted to ask, because we tend to have these discussions, and sometimes they delve into some of the torturous ways that enslaved Africans were handled. Mm-hmm. And sometimes in contemporary times, you have these discussions with other people, and one thing in moving forward, whether it be in the academia, whether it be I work law enforcement, that you get to a point where you get some people that will always argue compassion. That we should do all these things, and we should kind of we should try to appeal to the compassion of those that were the oppressors. And and I know I know it's broad, but I asked that question, and I asked that question because in where I'm at, where I work at, I always get coworkers that always ask me the question. They would always say, you're not worried about what they'll do to you when you talk like that, or when you do these public speakings, or when you post these things on Facebook? Because at some time when you get certain information and you get into deep research, you start to say to yourself, I can't speak in terms of trying to appeal to one's compassion. It's not going to happen. So how do you deal with that? And I think it's probably a little more liberal with academia, but with us, you work with guns, you work with people behind you with guns. How do you deal with that? How do you deal with that from your perspective, and how do you deal with that in a general position?
Mm.
That's a great question. How do I deal with that? It is not more liberal in academia. I just want to tell you, academia is, and well, you know what? It is more liberal in academia, but African people need to understand that liberalism is also a problem. It is an evil African people need to get away from. We don't need liberal. We need to get the hell out of this stuff. Here we go. Liberalism is just a smiling face missionary ready to take your land and give you white Jesus. That is what it is. But And I made a decision a very long time ago that I was going to speak the truth because I was way more accountable to my ancestors than I was to any of this stuff that not real. And so I've paid a lot of costs for that. I'm gonna put that in quotes. I'm currently on a 1-year postdoctoral fellowship. Once that's over, I don't know what's going to happen next. I've applied for jobs at lots of Negro schools for whom I know I am way too radical. I've been sat down and had lots of little private conversations about how I talk and how that's just not okay with this conservative school. And you seem great, the scholarship is great, but it's just a little too much for us. So it's all political. There is no workplace that is safe from that. So I know I've missed these so-called opportunities to be in these institutions, in these spaces, because of this truth, because of my inability. I just wasn't born with a filter, that kind of filter.
There you go.
I tried. Right. I gave up a long time ago. I tried, but it's just too urgent. It's too urgent, and and so I've understood that there would just be certain things in life that I wouldn't have or have access to. And I'm okay with letting those go. Now, African people, I don't pass judgment on, people to make the decisions they've made to have what they feel they need to have in their lives. But when people talk about compassion and stuff as it relates to our enemies, it's just like we're the only people who would even have this conversation. Like, you see, we're the only people who would even entertain having a conversation about feeling love and compassion for our enemies. Right. Gotten fully into the war. Like, our heads are not in the game right now. We're already talking about forgiveness and how they feel about things. And that's what I'm not interested in understanding. And I feel like I've done the John Henry Clark. I've learned my master's history. I know it inside and out, despite not wanting to. But that's what I'm saying. Like, African people, our cultural system and our values of compassion and humaneness and balance, like, to some degree, they've perverted it so that we only only practice the best of those values when it comes to them. We don't apply those to ourselves. We don't have the patience and the compassion and the second and third chances to prove ourselves. We're looking for the good black person. We don't look for the good African. We like, dang, that's right. Don't your people do it too? Yes. Right. We're ready to say that when it comes to us, but we're not as hard on them. You know, people are like, oh, you're so hard on these white folks. I'm like,
Hey.
what? I mean,
Hey.
what does that even mean? I don't even know. So I just try not to even put myself in those conversations when people are like, well, I mean, what about the good white people? I'm just like, look, everybody's looking for that exception. And it's the rules that is killing African people. So I'm looking at the rules. I got to look at patterns, and I got to look at numbers. And maybe that's me being a scholar, but I think that is part of being African. We have logic. We do make sense. You know, it's not all flowery, and you know, we've let this hippie narrative kind of overtake our understanding of what is really just a factual understanding of the world that everyone else allows themselves to have. So we just have to give ourselves permission to be like this and be grown up enough to pay the cost.
Right.
You know, I have a second part to that question. Really quick. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Ali. Great question.
The question is this: do you find, and I say that because it has been my experience, but do you find that the more you kind of get engaged in an African spiritual foundation, and what I mean by that, a lot of us, when we came up, it was always via either a Black liberation theology, and then maybe through the Nation of Islam, and then when we wind up landing, we land someplace in African spirituality, right?
Yeah.
That compassion that we just talked about, it diminishes even more so. The more you get into that spiritual purview, that whole compassion thing kind of gets kicked out the door. I'm not sure if that's something that you've seen, if that's something you've experienced. Is that something, and it also begs to the question, if we got more so in tune with our African spirituality, acknowledge the ancestors, acknowledge the Orishas, that would give us more of that logic that you were talking about as far as how we see things.
Yes. Okay. So I'm so glad you asked that question. I just want to say thank you for that question, because we do not have that. That's almost a taboo question to ask in some spaces. Right. And I think that's so important. And I think, again, that's why modernity and going back to mother is such an important thing for me. Because what we have here in the diaspora is crisis mode versions of our African cultures. But what we fail to understand is, if we look at voodoo, we look at hoodoo, and we look at all these other traditions, there are so many therapeutic aspects of these traditions to people who have trauma, who have violence as a constant narrative in their lives and in their history, and it is imprinted on their DNA to certain degrees. And sometimes when we go back and fetch it, when we try to go back and get these African traditions, we practice them like Europeans. We get so formulaic about it. We get so interested in, the Oriki, like, the words of your Yoruba intonations are not perfect. Like, you just done. Go sit somewhere. And there's so much emphasis on the ritual and the protocol and the this and the and everybody's so busy and struggling so hard to catch up to something that they weren't raised in, that the heart of it is gone. The human compassion and someone just laying their hands on you and looking you in your eye, holding you, that's gone. That's gone, and that's what we need. We need the mothering. We are motherless children. We haven't been mothered properly. We can't come into these traditions and expect to practice them in a healthy or balanced way if we haven't just had the basics of, like, establishing our human worth and value, of connecting with each other on some basic level. And this is, I think, why the church is still so strong, even though most of us know that thing is ridiculous. And it's because there's still that. There's still the touching and the coming through and showing up when people are going through bad things in life. Many African societies, that I've moved around in, they got all the protocol, everybody's dressed appropriately, all the colors are correct, but there's no feeling there at all. It's just common circumstance, and there is, and protocol and all of that is important. I'm not even trying to diminish the importance of what our ancestors understood worked. Those work in a space, in a time, in a context, but those traditions are dynamic. They are meant to grow. They are meant to evolve, and they are certainly meant to meet the needs of our people, both in the short term and the eternal. And we are afraid to adapt them. We are afraid to use them and reach into them and say, okay, well, here's the heart of why we do this. Maybe we don't have everything they had in 16th century, Nigeria, but we have, or not Nigeria, but that part of the world, but we have what we have in the 21st century can we get to that same end goal, that same outcome, that same type of healing by doing it this way? Can we consult spirit and ask for permission to do that? We don't even go to spirit. We go through these people. Like, we go through so many priests to get to something we have access to as human spirits with our own ancestors, with our own Ori. You know, we are the divine, and I
That's
think
right.
we're so used to having a pastor, we don't realize that there's a lot of spiritual work that must be done internally with yourself, with your mama now. Always go to your people. You know what I mean?
That's right.
Always go. There's nothing blocking you from going to your people. So
That's right.
that's really unfortunate, and I hope that by talking about this concept of mothering and asking the question, who mothers you and who is your mother? Who do you mother? Where's the mothering going on in your organization or your institution?
Right.
We can, and that's men and women must mother and be mothered. Like, then we can start to have these conversations where we can kind of keep what works for us and keep what the best of what our ancestors wanted for us, and then throw away all of the pomp and circumstance and the pageantry, and throw away the trash that comes from us trying to make our stuff look like European stuff.
You know, it speaks to the, I'm
like
thinking
to
of the wisdom of our ancestors to even have Ma'at, you know, represented by a woman. So you speak to the mothering, and you know, our ancestors, you know, righteousness, Ma'at is a woman. So I saw someone else chimed in, had a question.
Oh, and I
Yes,
was
Brother Kevin, I was going to discuss.
Forgive me, sister. I just wanted to add another point, and I think that this is why we have so many Europeans and non-Africans trying to come into these traditions, because we have made them so palatable, so
That's right.
rigid, that anybody can come in and go through the motions and feel like they have become a part of the traditions. And once we get back to the heart of the traditions, the blood and the lineage of the traditions, the sentiment and the feeling of the traditions, that stuff you can't fake. And I think that, you know, we can sort out what's what and who belongs and who ain't in it when we get back to like what the traditions are really supposed to be about. Anyway, sorry.
I am so feeling this discussion, because I am from New Orleans, and we are deeply rooted in tradition and spirituality and customs that have been preserved since before the days of enslavement. What I would like to, you know, for instance, Congo Square was excuse my voice, I'm coming off of a cold, but Congo Square in New Orleans was a place where our ancestors who were enslaved, and even the free Africans who lived there, were allowed to congregate on Sundays to perform African rituals with drumming, dancing, and there were women always there who would provide healing herbs for anyone who needed them for illnesses.
Yeah.
Or if anyone, you mentioned poisons, if anyone needed some poison to take care of their enslavers for some reason or another, that was provided as well.
Yeah.
And they would call them juju bags, you know.
Agree.
But exactly. And those things still live today. A lot of people will criticize those who are from Louisiana and tease us about it, but I actually take pride in it because I understand its roots, its African roots. The only problem I have with it, specifically with New Orleans, is Catholicism is very strong in New Orleans. And women like Marie Laveau really had control over the church and those who ran the church, to where they would hide the deities into what they call saints in Catholicism. But the only problem was it got so watered down and people even lost what it was, that they began to embrace the Christianity and shun the real African rituals and the root of what was being shared or trying to be preserved, you know, and they were hiding it in Catholicism. So I do appreciate this conversation. I really do.
Yeah, that word syncretism bothers me. I think that's just a very convenient word for Europeans to try to believe that we have mixed with them, and you know, and you know, it's equal parts this and equal parts that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like we're all just hybrid out here in the world, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that is European survival has been based on grafting themselves onto our bodies like parasites so that they can continue to survive on the planet, and that hasn't helped them anyway because they're on the decline. They have negative birth rate ways.
But it's hurt our youth because it's not passed down in its purest form. And now the kids are doing things that they don't really understand what they're doing or why they're doing it, you know?
Again, that goes back to mothering. We are not still the storytelling people. Storytelling is just sit around and have fun and entertain. Storytelling is how you impart your values and the deep structural meanings of your life and the things that you do, how you practice and model relationships, how you connect people with their ancestry and call those names that are important. That we haven't done. And so, yeah, you're right. It's all the trappings, and attaching it to Catholicism gives us beads to wear and candles to light, you know, and all
veils on our heads, all of those things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it makes it convenient for us to have all the physical trappings of the spiritual systems, but we don't have the sensibility anymore. So, yeah, I tend to agree.
And even our tradition of the second line, and burying our dead with the second line parade is what they call it. But that is also African rooted. In Nigeria, they still do that.
Right.
And some of the first dances in Africa are the dances that we do in the second line. And these kids today are doing these dances with no knowledge of what they're doing. And there's no connection.
When I transition, please pick up my casket and dance with it, please.
Okay. Toss mine upside down. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, but you're right. And in my research, you know, I'll be reading about, like, you know, 1850s in New York. Some European is complaining because there are all these mummeries and outcries and all these African women wailing, and you know, when someone has died and then they take them to the African burial ground, which, you know, has come up. And I feel like it's interesting because all over the place, our ancestors' bones are literally coming up out of the ground. It's like they're speaking to us. So now all these archaeological digs are happening. But I'm like, no, y'all need to be reading these archaeological reports and looking at the bones. These bones are talking, like they're telling us, and they're giving us extremely vital information, all kinds of juju coming up out the ground.
Yes.
Seeds, and Adinkra symbols, and like,
and even on the political side, they're doing whatever they can to destroy these traditions in us. For instance, like in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina, the flood, it dispersed people all over. You can't destroy within us. So every place that New Orleanians moved and relocated to, they brought those traditions with them. And now you see people second lining in New York. You see people second lining in Ohio. You know, you see people they're going to hold on to it, you know, because it's a good thing.
That's important. And then hopefully people in these other places, African people in these other places will see that this is, again, keeping that circle unbroken and just reconnecting with something that belongs to them too. And it just happens to be one of those kind of more Africanized zones because of its relationship to Haiti and the particular, like, French blend. But I think that, you know, with those traditions, if we look even deeper than that, we see, like, you know, in certain African traditions, when we bury our dead, there are women who are there to stimulate crying. They're there to mourn the dead and evoke crying in the community because we need to release that. We need to have that time to
wailing.
To wail and connect with the grief that we feel that we've lost this person's body. But we know the spirit's still there. We need people to collect the information from this person to channel this person so that they can get out the things they may not have had the opportunity to say in the flesh. We need those traditions.
Yes, ma'am.
So, you know, nowadays you go to Babalawo or your priest and they're like, no, you don't cry in front of this shrine, and you don't do this, and you don't do this, and you don't. And there's no room for you to just be a person sometimes.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes the stories I hear about people who feel so uncomfortable when they're doing their work, and they feel so uptight when they're doing their work. I'm like, yes, there's the reverence that must happen in certain types of work. But where do you go to cry? Where do you go to get help? Where do you go to, you know, get that, you know? And that is a tradition in and of itself. And so I just hope that we can have those spaces too. We need all of the above, you know. And I'm proud of folks from Louisiana for being able to hold on to those traditions to whatever degree they have been able to, because certainly many of us out here not only lost the fight, but some of us have begun to give it up willingly. So
Really, yes, yes. And
So Dr. Icihile, so it's 11:09. So what I want to do is have an opportunity to actually give us some examples of those women that you found in your research that maybe some of us might not have heard of, or just speak to some of the ones that you found in your research, if you can.
Okay.
Specific examples or names or that, and then the follow up to that is, how do we go about fixing this, right? Because, like you said, traditionally in academia, I went to Hampton University, so traditionally, I didn't learn this at Hampton. I don't know if others might have, but so how do we fix this? How do we fix this problem? So those two I want to get to, and then if we have more questions at the end, we'll entertain more questions.
So I'll start with how do we fix this problem, because that's something I think about constantly. I remember sitting with Baba Ackland Lynch, and important brother who was a part of many movements in the Black Freedom era that people really don't realize, because he's from Trinidad and he's not African American, and and so his story is not a part of this narrative, even though you see him in half the pictures that you look at when you talk about civil rights and Black power. Anyway, he sat me down and said, "Okay, you're gonna write your last book," and he was just like, we can't just be reading books all the time. Like, a lot of our people aren't reading these books, and you write a book and it's dope, but five people read it. What have you done? You wasted time. And so what I think must happen is that we must be institution builders. More importantly, we must be nation builders. More importantly, we must reinforce and build the nations that exist, and lend our support to those nations. We must also, I think, get outside of an institutional model and be okay with taking significant action without there being an institution, without there being a president and a secretary and a treasurer and a grant writer, and just do the work. So if you think that more African people should know this stuff, and I'm working on this as well, I'm working on a couple of projects, then you go and teach them. You just go to where they are and run your mouth and give out information and make yourself available to folks. A lot of my colleagues are afraid of people. They're quite antisocial, and they'd rather you just read the book and stay away from them. And so, when's the last time you had this discussion at a barbershop or a beauty salon where our people go because we got this hair that nobody else has, and so we've got these ready-made autonomous spaces. Go to those places. I mean, I knew a Black pastor who, many of our so-called Christian pastors, and y'all know this, folks in Ghana, y'all know this for real, but they still do the African stuff to make sure that congregation shows up every Sunday. They still got to. They still consult with their priests and all the uncles they know, and that's our stuff. And so this pastor, he's all into all the African stuff, and he's like, I'm gonna make these DVDs and I'm gonna pass them out to the barbershops and beauty supply stores. So instead of watching the game or watching like the housewives of whatever, I'm gonna be watching their history while they're getting their hair done, or having these really important discussions in that space. And I feel like if we just made short videos, we can get people to be watching that, or we can go to schools or wherever kids hang out, even if you don't want to go through the school system, because they make it a crazy bureaucracy just to reach our children in these institutions. And so, hey, we know where they at. We know where they are when they're not in school. But I think we have that fear of connection, that kind of reaching out and touching somebody and saying, hey, little sister, let me sit with you for a little while. We're afraid of that. And I think we have to become that bodies on the line type of people again. Because that is how we build trust. We don't have trust for each other anymore. We don't know each other. We don't talk to the people next door. Not here where I live in D.C. We don't do that. We don't borrow sugar, or whatever healthy food we kale. I don't know. I borrow sugar. I mean, but I'm working on it, but we don't do that anymore. And I think that once we start doing that, the problem will begin to solve itself. That is the biggest thing that gentrification has done that could destroy our communities in recent years, and that is the biggest thing that we must, I think, work on. Because then I think that the spiritual sensibilities become much easier. You'll see the seeds that are there. I taught my African American history class in the Richmond City Jail. We had a few conversations about spirituality in the talking about the history, the straight up history, I guess. And them brothers asked me to come back over the summer for free. I was not being paid by Virginia Commonwealth University or nothing. Like, I just came back and did the whole summer with them just talking about African spirituality. And them brothers are 5%er, super Baptist, hyper Protestants. And at the end of that summer, we were all Africans. We were all, talking about injustice and the spiritual experiences that we had that our religions didn't give us a way to understand. We were putting that stuff back in place, and it was the easiest process in the world. I think we just have to be with each other. I was locked in the room with them brothers for weeks. And also, I think Christians are a huge brain drain. I think the revolution will begin not in college classrooms. I think it will begin there because they don't have the same hopes and dreams to be a part of this stuff. I think that illusion has been wiped from their minds very early on, and so they're not under the same illusions that our college kids are under.
Absolutely.
They're ready already. You don't have to tell them that someone's foot is on their neck. You don't have to tell them someone's trying to keep them down. I don't have to work that hard to convince them of those things. That getting a good job isn't going to solve all of the problems of our people. Like, they're there already. So I think we should spend more time going into there. And, I would send them CDs and, sneak stuff in, material. And the next time I would show up, a few days later, the whole prison had listened to that CD, or the whole jail had listened, watched that DVD. They had snuck into the computer lab. It's an incubator in a kind of way that they eat books. You know what I mean? They imbibe knowledge, and they're ready for it. And I think we really waste so much time, kind of not seeing them. They're invisible. They're just off somewhere. They're criminals, blah, blah, blah. And I think that we need to do that much more. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, I got off on my
Actually, thank you for that. So, actually, the first part was, some specific examples in your research of women in the struggle, in the liberation. I don't know if you've seen, I've been posting, I don't want to say the name of the other site, but I've been posting some stuff on the other site, Asapo.
Yeah, I just wanted to show the flag is much better, more important.
I could actually share, I can actually make you the presenter. I don't know how that would work better. That would work better.
You know what? Is there a way that I can just send you? This is a part of my Prezi presentation I've done on some of this stuff. I can just forward you the link, and you can just share that with the group, maybe.
Okay. I mean, this is fine. I don't know if anybody else. I can see it. I'm good.
Okay. So yeah, I just felt like that probably was better to look at than my face. Okay. So I'll give you a few examples. So with the women specifically that I would call Ohema, and I'm Nana, by the way, please correct me on my pronunciation. My tree is very limited. But the Queen Mothers, I think, are just fascinating. So when we look at New York, for instance, in 1712, there's a huge Negro conspiracy. And we have women named Sarah and named Abigail who are executed. But each one of these women has a very close association with another man. So with Abigail is a man named Thomas, and they're both executed together on the same day. And you see this same type of execution, this kind of dyad, this woman-man pair, all over the place. But what is interesting and what I suspect is happening from the ways that the Europeans have written down and some of the testimony of the Africans in these trials, where they're being tried for, conspiracy to commit revolt and conspiracy to kill whites and blah, 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 that these women are serving in a capacity that's political, that is militaristic, that is spiritual, and that is why I say that they are Queen Mothers, because of the reverence that other people have to them. They are necessary. And so Abigail is an example. Sarah is an example. If you go back to what I mentioned earlier, in Antigua in 1736, you have another revolt, and there's a sister named Oba, and I definitely suspect that she is some sort of ritual leader in the community, because Oba, what happens is she is, all of the Africans who are interested in this revolt meet at her house, and there is a feast. And these feasts are really interesting because, of course, when you break bread with people, you don't eat people's food you don't trust. That's just how we do. So eating food with people is a part of it signifies a certain type of bond of trust and loyalty. I wanted to show you all this picture. This is burial 340 from the New York African Burial Ground. Those are waist beads. This is the pelvic bones of a young woman who was about 19 years old. And they had some concretes come in and analyze the bones. And they found many, many, many important things, important symbolism that lets you know which part of the place that these Africans were from. But this is New York, but in a similar vein, you can go to some place like Antigua, and Alba's there, and all these Africans are at her house. They bring her fish. They take some of the dirt from her sister's grave. So again, you have this understanding of moja. You have like the spirit and the blood in the spirit that women transmit to their children, and the uterine line of descent that is very important in this worldview. And if you're going to invoke your ancestors, your significant ones that you want to bring into this space, and that we in the flesh who are about to pop stuff off, we are binding ourselves in loyalty to these people, and these, then we must call this woman, this important woman who is in this community. This is the sister's grave dirt that is put together with some blood, and there's a ritual that takes place. And of course, the Europeans make it sound all creepy and spooky, but the revolutionaries, all of the people who are participating, they take this blood oath, this ntam. And I know a sister who was writing specifically about these oaths, because you see this oath taking in all these places. What is secret and what is clandestine is important. What is invisible and being invisible is important for these things to work. So again, that's why being behind is not a place of diminished power. Being behind is where all the action is going on. And so Oba is presiding over this ritual where people are bringing offerings, people are taking this oath, this deeply binding spiritual oath. And then once she gives her blessings, these people go out in the field and start trying to take over New York and slavery. The same thing happens in Jamaica, in several times in Jamaica. In 1760, there's a lot of documentation about this woman named Cuba. She's called the Queen of Kingston. She's owned by this Jewish woman. And she's got all of the symbols of state. She's got the sword of state. And we know, people who study Akan cultures understand that, the bearing of the sword is an important act of leadership. And so it's not just this toy that she's kind of carrying around. It's the colors. It is the symbolism of what she's wearing that matters. And even though they write about her as if she's some sort of costumed idiot, these Africans are just deluding themselves by calling her queen. She is sentenced to be transported from the island of Jamaica. So they know she's important enough where she got to go. So right, there was some crime committed. The crime is just being too important. I don't know about that. You know what I mean? For me, that's a red flag. Like, okay, if she was just a costumed idiot running around, why was she such a threat that you had to kick her off the island? And she actually worked it out where she got some pirates to bring her back. They snuck her back onto the island because, pirates work for pay. Whoever got money, they're going to, So she hooked up with some pirates, and they snuck her back onto the island. Nothing could happen until she got back. That is what it means to be an Okema. Like this, you are the sign and symbol of a state that is in balance, a state that is in good repair. Jamaica is not about, let's just get a few of us, me and my bae and, the kids, we're going to be good. Everybody else, I don't know about y'all. That's not how it works. And so when you put this woman in place, when you install her, you are saying this whole thing is about to be us and our government. And that is why she's so important. And everything about her symbolism, everything I read in the record, even though the Europeans didn't know all of what happened, they knew the gravity of her presence there. And when she got back, that's when it happened. And so that's also the same year that John Thistle would start seeing these women with these interesting haircuts. They start shaving their heads, and people wearing, red bandanas and things. And you see that symbolism show up in Sankofa. Of course, Grima did his research. I think he did 9 years of research for the film, and so he can tell you more about this than I can. But again, the patterns are the same. I'm still working on unpacking the situation in South America, but I suspect it might be even easier because down there, Africans from the Gold Coast and many other parts, so-called Gold Coast, were able to keep their names. So many African people, even living today, have African ethnic group names as their middle names or their last name, their surname. So I know a friend named Charo Mina Rojas. So Mina lets you know which port her ancestors came from, or which general region of Africa. And so in the Caribbean, you still have some of these names. You have Akan Day names still circulating around the Caribbean. Why do we have the nickname Cujo out here? In parts of the South and other places. That's Cujo. These are names that are still alive and kicking on the continent of Africa, but certainly in the diaspora as well. And so there's the legacy that these women have continued to name themselves and establish their identity. And nobody can really even figure out how they were able to retain their names when everybody else is being forced to be Toby, But that matters to them, and that's why the Akan example is so critical, and it makes it easier for me to find. Because somehow they were able to maintain that sense of nationhood, and to the degree that other Africans would give themselves Akan names when they decided they wanted to be serious about freedom. The Akanization that some scholars have talked about, which I think is really fascinating, and I think there's much more work that should be done around that. But yeah, those are some examples.
Yeah, we actually have you talked about South America. We actually have Dr. Nsumi Moore, Dr. Moore. Yeah, he's actually he's going to join BB2 Mikasa, I believe, in June or late May or June to come on and do another discussion just around that topic, South America and African detentions and things of that nature. So we're excited about that as well. And and speaking to your point about being out there and having a platform, this is what we're trying to do at BB2 Mikasa is have this platform to have these discussions, to have this dialogue and have it disseminate on our other platforms, wherever we may be, so that we can get this information out. A lot of times we don't have these platforms, and we're on, this is the African-owned, African-run platform. A lot of the members you see here today are essential to BB2 Mikasa, and it's a platform that you're always welcome to come back, and if you have any future projects, I think you said something about a project you have coming up. If you have any project coming up, let us know some of the things you got coming up, so that we can definitely look out for you and invite you back. We'd love to have you back again. But anything coming up, I know you're doing, I know you're at Reginald Lewis Museum in Baltimore. I've been there several times. I definitely got to make a trip down now to Baltimore. Yeah, he put the question out there at the end.
He has another one. I saw another question. Dang, Dr. Campbell. What is that?
What do you think about us fighting against our enemies in the form of white Eurasians, Americans, while contributing to our enemies through taxes, jobs, and I'm going to throw Facebook. What do you think about us contributing? Essentially, divesting. Here we go. Divesting.
I definitely think that divesting should be like a constant project of shedding off as much as we can, bit by bit, layer by layer, as quickly as possible to divest. So there was a conversation that came up yesterday at the conference. Like we want to fight them, and we talk about wanting to fight them, but we put money in their pockets, and we haven't found African ways to be. I think the brother said we must find collective interdependence on each other. Because if we don't depend on other African people for our livelihood, we can always just tap out when being African is just a little too difficult or a little uncomfortable or a little too expensive, and so we have to create ways to hold ourselves accountable and really rely on each other, and so we can't just tap out when the going gets rough trying to be all African out here. So I think that there's got to be some sort of collective action around divesting from things like taxes. We already know taxes are bullshit and they're illegal. Our president doesn't pay taxes. It's this guy, the orange one. And so,
Our.
so you know, and also I think that for the fact that Europeans are pulling their kids out of public schools and Europeans are divesting from paying taxes, just on a basic level, they know these systems don't make any sense even for them. We should have been on that a long time ago because I think it's completely nonsensical. It's like every other contradiction we live with as African people, and you know I'm certainly one of those people. But my life goal is to not be here very long. My life goal is to I'm trying to get that job in Ghana and just be out. You know, my daughter will not live here as an adult if I have anything to say about it. She will not be putting money into the pockets of our enemies if we can make that happen. So that's what I'm saying. We need reinforcements bad. Yes.
So I'm gonna unmute everybody. I thought we were going to forgive me if everybody let me see if everybody. So there we go. So we're coming to the end. We got the tough questions at the end. Dr. Cambone hit you with tough questions, which was great. Really appreciate. He says 1 against 20 million.
There it is. Right.
Yeah. So Dr. Iyelli, we really appreciate the conversation. Really appreciate you joining us here in Mikasa. Very great discussion. Very great points.
Answer that question.
Yeah, we're gonna have the recording of this video provided to all. We're gonna actually post it on BB2 Mikasa, and Dr. Iyelli, I will also share it with you as well.
Okay.
Once we get this title and make it presentable, all that kind of stuff. But where can we see you? Where can we see you? Where can we see your work, or what do you have coming up real quick? And then we'll go ahead and close it out.
Okay, so I'm trying to start doing some videos, gathering a group of sisters to travel with me to some historical sites. We're going to begin to, so I went to the Harriet Tubman National Historical Park that just opened up last month.
Mm-hmm.
I was just disgusted and horrified at being on the land where this woman was raised and lived and like snatched people out and strategized, and it was like mostly Urugu talking about what happened, and all these little weird park rangers running around, and just it was just. And so I was like, okay, so I'm coming back. I'm gonna pour libation properly, and yes, thank you, Nana Campbell. That was an awesome class, by the way. I took his capoeira class when I was in Ghana. I didn't think he remembered me. That's awesome. That was the pastor friend was the one I was taking capoeira class, the one who wants to now practice African spirituality and and do all that stuff with the barbershops. But yes, thank you. Give thanks. So, but what I want to do is try to go to these places, honor our ancestors, talk about the history and the perspective that I know. That's all I can offer. And just, just show reverence and show people, like, if you black and you go into these sites, don't just read the plaque and listen to the white interpreter and then walk away, because you're not going to feel anything, you're not going to see anything. And our ancestors, some of their energy is still in these places. And so we go and lift them up and call on that energy. Like Europeans call their ancestors constantly. They put their names on everything. They revive themselves from that energy. Our ancestors are, I think, largely unemployed, just hanging out, like, when are you going to, we are the victorious ones. You need to be pouring for us, calling us. And so I'm just going to just go on the road and just do that and record myself and my sister and brothers, whoever wants to join in. Eventually, I'm hoping that the group expands and people just try to catch us wherever we are and come and pay respects. When we went to the African burial ground in New York with one of my former professors, he was pouring libation. Like, I felt myself lifting off the ground, and I know one of the women that was buried there gave me my dissertation. She gave me the story. I could see her face in my mind. Just from going there and honoring her, I was like, okay, well, now my mission is to tell your story. And that's how this whole project started. And so I'm like, okay, we've got to start doing that. We got to go to where our people are and lift them up, and they will give us the tools we need to free ourselves. They just give us the information we need to have. And so I want to show people and model how we can start to do that.
Oh, looking forward to it. Be sure, we hope that you allow us to follow you on your journey and share it with us. We can host it here on a
Absolutely.
We can follow you. So Anybody else have any last comments? I want to thank Dr. Icihile for joining us. I'm coming to Baltimore. I hate that I missed the last presentation, but I'm definitely coming to the museum now.
Okay, so let me know.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Reach out to the members here on the BB because we're all over. So you got sisters and brothers all over the place. So even if they're not traveling with you, they can meet you when you get there.
Yes, please. Because that's the places that I should go, and we should meet up, and places that you think should be lifted up. Please
Thank you.
Yes, the next time you're in New York, please let me know. This is Yao.
Will do. I will.
Yeah. Okay, Dr. Icihile, like I said, we appreciate it. We're going to close out, and I'm going to say Madasi.
Madasi.
And thank you, Ali and Althea, for joining.
Thank you, man.
Questions for everything. And that concludes. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
Have a good day.
Appreciate y'all. You all take care.
Bye-bye.